Hello and welcome back to the Premier Injuries podcast. Today we are talking all about West Ham. James, do you want to tell us all about your podcast, everything to do with West Ham? Where can people find out?
I'm the co-founder and co-host of the We Are West Ham podcast, originated from the West Ham fan show on talkSPORT Radio, which unfortunately is no longer a thing due to COVID. But Will and my co-host and myself thought, let's just keep it as a podcast through COVID and beyond. And it's become quite a popular, quite a well-known West Ham podcast. You can, if you want to check us out, you can get us on YouTube, we're on all the podcast platforms, and on Twitter we are _West Ham. I think it's been a while since we recorded an episode, but yes, that is it. So yeah, all good.
Doing the PR there,
That's it.
And everything. I guess going ahead of the season, is optimism slightly tempered by maybe a lack of transfers? At the moment of recording, we've only seen kind of Areola sign from loan to permanent deal. We've seen a Gerd or a Good. I'm not sure how you pronounce that. You can you don't know either. Well, there you go. No. And then you signed a young midfielder as well from Swansea. Does that kind of make you a little bit nervous? Because we will get onto it. Squad depth, injuries were probably the biggest thing that held you back last year.
It is a concern. It did hold us back last year. I would go as far as say it cost us the Europa League, and probably cost us the top six as well. We just ran out of steam towards the end, and not investing anything last January, not buying a striker in January at the very least, cost us really. So there is a concern that we do need at least 4 or 5 new players. We've just in the weirdest fashion lost out to Jesse Lingard to Nottingham Forest, which is the weirdest thing. I didn't see that one coming. Would have liked him. It'd have been good, and he would have added to squad depth. But we're led to believe that we're in talks with at least 2 strikers. We've got left back coming in potentially, and maybe even another central midfielder. So there is the thought that we've got 3 weeks before the beginning of the season. We desperately still need a striker. But then I think there is an element of confidence amongst the fan base that by the time we kick off against City on that first weekend, we will be in a better position at least than we were at the end of May. And we've still got 4 weeks after the season starts to get players in. So not quite perfect just yet, but I think we'll be ready. And I trust in David Moyes.
Yeah, I think David Moyes has proved a lot of doubters wrong. He's shown his brilliance. And when he came back to West Ham, I was excited to see what he could do, because this is the type of project that he does really well in. And let's talk about the tactics of the team, because that's probably one of the main reasons why the team has done well. He's understood. He's brought in his definitive style, which is unique probably in the Premier League. It's kind of harking back to yesteryear, bygone era of football, but it works for him and it is brilliant. So yeah, do you want to talk us through the tactics, and we can look at some of the numbers as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think it might change this year if you can get at least 1 or 2 strikers in. It might tempt him into more of a 4-4-2 stroke 4-3-3 in attack. But, we're used to seeing him as a 4-2-3-1 or a 4-1-4-1 in terms of formation. And one thing I've noticed over the last couple of years in particular is that we don't really like having possession of the ball. We're quite comfortable in allowing teams to dictate tempo, dictate possession, and then, counter-attack, we get hold of the ball. And if we don't score on the counter-attack, the idea is to get a set piece and score from that. And that's been West Ham for the last 2 years. That's what's been the success story, really. There have been some games where we've opted to try and control the ball a little bit more. But in those games, we struggle a little bit. We run out of ideas very quickly if we're made to work for goals. So yeah, we're more of a counter-attacking style team, and we've got the pace up front to be able to do that. The likes of Bowen and Antonio. Creativity with Fornals and Lanzini and Benrahma. So, and it works, but set pieces are our big strength, and that's what Moyes loves. The big Craig Dawson and Thomas Souček running in late
Yeah, it's we'll get on to the set piece stuff a little bit later because it is one of your strong suits. But I do want to talk about the data a little bit more because, as you said there, the team actually average less than 50% possession per game. It's usually, last season the average was 47.8 possession in all games. And this is where maybe the foibles of the team come out. You had the sixth highest number of long passes attempted and the third highest number of crosses. And that is all to your aerial ability. And this is why the likes of Antonio and Souček do well in the box, because they're really hard to defend against, aren't they?
Yeah, incredibly hard. And Souček's got that particular skill where he'll arrive in the box really late from midfield. And I mean, he was less effective at it last year, but his role in the team slightly changed a little bit with alongside Declan Rice. But, you know, when you've got, you know, big central defenders and the big central midfielders, it'd be silly not to look at set piece and go, right, well, that's going to be one of our strengths. You know, we're going to work on that. And then when you've got players like Cresswell who can whip a ball in from anywhere on the pitch, you've got Bowen who can get down wide and put a ball in at pace. You know, there's so many opportunities there. And we've got the aerial ability, and we've got another one in the bank with Aguerd or Agerd. I think we'll just stick with Aguerd. He's in, and he's good in the air as well. So it's quite clear. Zuma as well. It's quite clear that that's a strength that Moyes has been going for. And then you look at a couple of the players that we're in for. I think Gianluca Scamacca, I think it's Sassuolo. He's over 6 foot. And he's coming in as a striker potentially if we can get him. So again, aerial ability all round. That's what Moyes wants.
Yeah, and just interesting. Let's talk upon Souček's kind of differing style last season, because I think the way that he sat in the double pivot meant that actually Declan Rice could be even more brilliant. He could show off his prowess. He could make those wonderful runs forward. And I think that really works well. Do you think this is something that we're going to see grow even more next season? Because like you said, on the counter, the balls are usually played to Ben Rama, Jared Bowen, Antonio and Fornals. But I think last season we saw a little bit more where Declan Rice was also making those runs, you know, running from deep, creating opportunities there. And maybe do you see him getting a bit more of assists or maybe even a goal output from it?
Yeah, I think he's certainly one to look at. I mean, he came out recently in an interview and said that he feels like he should be scoring more goals. You know, his target's 10 a season. And I wouldn't be surprised if he started getting a little bit closer to that. I think he got 6 last year in all competitions, and that's because he wants to get forward. You know, he shows it a lot with England. Loves to drive forward with the ball. He's so good at it. He can beat a man, and the fact that he reads the game so well allows him to make interceptions and then, you know, start counter attacks very, very quickly. And Souček dropping deep has allowed him to do that. We saw it a number of occasions last season. That's why he had his best scoring season to date. It was because he was allowed to get into those more attacking areas. And he's the best midfielder we've got that can do that in terms of, you know, out of the 3 now, if you include Flynn Downs. So I would expect him to be a lot more involved than last season as well. He will be, you know, the central midfielder pushing forward the most.
I think let's bring it then, moving from tactics to data. Obviously, it intermingles. But last season, we saw maybe a bit of a regression in the defensive data of the team, which is interesting because they still kept their about 9th/10th place in terms of the data. So last season, you had 51 goals conceded, but your XG conceded was 58.8. You look at the season before, though, and there's almost about a 10 XG conceded difference. But again, like I said, you kept that sort of position. I mean, does that underlying data worry you, or the fact that you've already bought a centre back, you know, to improve that back line? Do you think that is a positive move going forward, and you'll kind of get back the brilliance that is the hallmark of Moyes' style, really solid at the back?
Yeah, I think Aguerd coming in is a sign that, you know, I think David Moyes has been really careful with his recruitment. He could have bought a centre-back. He needed to buy a centre-back really in January, but he didn't feel like there was one available that really suited what he wanted. Aguerd is that guy. He's good on the ball. He's a ball-playing centre-back, but he's very, very difficult to beat. And our issue last year was that when Ogbonna was injured and ended up missing the rest of the season, and then you've only got Craig Dawson and Zuma. Then Zuma gets injured for, I think it was 2 months. Then you got Craig Dawson and Diop. Diop at the time was having a really poor spell with confidence and form. So you're relying on the 32-year-old Craig Dawson, who, as much as we love him, isn't, a top-level centre-back. And then, you factor in other injuries in defence, and it caused a lot of problems. So I'm not really surprised at the regression in terms of the defensive data. And it's quite obvious why that was. But building on the defence, bringing in someone like Aguerd, who's young and statistically superior to the likes of Dawson, it's an upgrade. And I think that will strengthen us. All we need now is a left back to really finish off that back four.
The interesting thing as well, you've already mentioned that he's good in the air, tall, but he's got great ball distribution as well. And he's a left centre back, which is a real premium in Europe's top 5 leagues. He's got another good thing about him is his injury record, pretty exemplary. So, there's a lot of great things going forward. So I guess my next question on defence is, do you think you'll get more than 8 clean sheets this season? Because that's probably one of the most disappointing things. I'm sure Moyes was quite annoyed about that as well.
Yeah, I think we're in a better position to do so. As I said, there was a lot of issues with our defence last year, which were almost out of our hands. The suspensions were they could have been avoided, but when you lose your best centre half for an entire season in October, I think he's gone, and then the centre half that you signed from Chelsea for 35 million quid then gets injured for 2 months. You're going to have issues when your backup's only Craig Dawson and Diop. So I'm not particularly surprised, but we will keep more clean sheets next year. And obviously we've signed Areola as well. Don't know whether he's going to be the number 1 yet or not, but I wouldn't be surprised if we kept more. But the big thing is that although we weren't keeping clean sheets, and this is one thing I want to add, is that one thing Moyes has done is shored us up to the point where West Ham don't get beaten. When I say beaten, I mean absolutely thrashed anymore. I think last season, I took the notes down earlier, we never lost by more than 2 goals last season. And we did conceded more than 3 in a game. So it just shows that even with some defensive issues, we're still quite difficult to beat. And we scored in pretty much almost, I think we scored in every home game. So even in attack, we were pretty good. So defensively, if that's better with Aguerd, we're on a good run.
Yeah, I think all podcasts are going to be deciding how to pronounce that name there. That's going to be the biggest debate of the whole show. The final question, though, on defence before we move to attack, Areola, is he this season's number 1?
No one really knows, if I'm honest. No one knows. There was the expectation that he probably would be, but I've got a feeling that Moyes will start the season with Fabianski in goal, and maybe he'll make the switch at some point in the season. Obviously, he's the long-term number 1. Fabianski signed a 1-year extension to his deal this summer, but I just wonder whether, for the sake of keeping the defence as settled as he possibly can. Obviously, Fabianski was the Premier League keeper last year. I just wonder whether we will start the season with him and then gradually ease Areola in, and they might make the switch where Fabianski will end the season as the cup goalkeeper. But to be fair, there's been no hint in any press conferences or anything on the website or any team news or anything like that. So I might be completely wrong. And Areola might be the first choice on the first weekend of the season. But it's a difficult one to call.
I think it also depends if Moyes is looking at the data, because you must be really excited from this. Areola's goalkeeping data is some of the best in Europe. And just looking at probably the standout statistic for valuing how good a goalkeeper is XG prevented of plus 0.29 per 90 is in Europe's top 1%. He's thrashing goalkeepers out there. Like you said, he's the long-term replacement. You must feel really settled when he's between the sticks.
Oh, yeah. I can't remember the last time we had two top-class goalkeepers at the football club and you're happy with either of them. We went together the last year or so has shown signs of maybe more prone to making mistakes. But, he's still the number one, and he's still a top-class Premier League keeper in my book, even at his age now. But knowing that when we were playing in the Cups, and he was a key reason why we got to the quarterfinals of the Carabao Cup last season. He was a key reason why we made it so far in Europe. Some world-class saves in those knockout stages in the Europa League against the likes of Sevilla and Lyon. So you knew going into any cup game, you weren't relying on a backup keeper that, probably weren't too sure whether you could trust him. We've come a long way from having Roberto as our backup keeper, to be fair. So yeah, we're very happy with him. Very happy.
Let's look at the attacking data then, and as you said, you're happy with it, and the stats back up as well. From kind of comparing the fact that there was a regression in the defensive data, it's kind of held up the 2021/22 data compared to the season before. The only maybe negative, and again, this will come back to the squad depth question, is Antonio's form. First half of the season, arguably one of the best players in the Premier League. Outstanding. He was actually one of the top players for expected goal involvements, game weeks 1 to 19, top 5 in that, in fact, 10.02. But then he comes to the end of the season and his XGI is 13 overall in terms of the actual XGI, and that put him in 13th of all players. And he underperformed that data by about 3 goals. Is there a long-term worry with his age, with the fact that he's always had problems with fitness, that downturn is longer term, or is that purely fatigue from the fact the number of games that you played?
I think it comes down to fatigue in this situation. I have every faith that he's still got 1 or 2 seasons left in him at the top level. But he played 47 games in all competitions last year. I think that's the first time in his career he's played that many games in a season. It's just been announced that at the beginning of last season, he changed his diet. And the club worked with the nutritionist to sort of completely overhaul his diet, which prevented the injuries. Why they didn't do that 3 years earlier, I don't know. But it changed him as a player. He started the season really, really sharply. As you said, he scored. He was one of the best players in the Premier League for the first half of the season. But then, when you got a player like that who is relied on to play almost every game for 90 minutes because he's the only striker in the first team. We didn't have a backup. It's no real surprise that he tailed off. His form tailed off. He had, little, 6 or 7 game runs where he didn't get a goal involvement, but then he'd score 2 and 3, and then it'd be like, okay, brilliant. And then he might have 1 or 2 games where he's off the ball again. So I'm not really surprised, to be fair. I'm not worried, but he desperately needs the help. And if we can I think we need 2 strikers before the end of the window, then that will just give him a little bit more freedom, but also push him to work a little bit harder as well. And it was felt amongst the fan base, particularly on our podcast, was that in the periods that he wasn't scoring, it was felt like, okay, it's not so much a lack of effort, but it's almost the fact that he knows that if he doesn't score for 3 games, well, he's not going to get dropped because there's no one behind him to push him. Whereas now, hopefully, fingers crossed, he might have 1 or 2 strikers vying for that first team spot, and it might just push him out a bit further to try a little bit harder and score more goals. So, yeah, I'm not overly worried yet. Let's put it that way.
I think as well, factoring in that evaluation of maybe no backup in terms of pushing him. There was also no backup to relieve his fatigue. With the style of play that he does, he's very muscularly dominant over players in terms of his physicality, but also he uses his speed a lot. And so he is going to tire more quickly than others. And so, that there is that factor. And maybe, do you think that if the team can buy in the right kind of backup, that actually this could be one of Antonio's best seasons yet? If he is allowed to rest, if he is allowed to have those moments where he can have the wind down, he could actually move on to that other level. Because as you said, last season, diet improved, incremental gains. I mean, the sky's the limit almost sometimes with Antonio. He is that brilliant.
Yeah, and I think he's hit double figures for goals in the last 3 seasons. So he's slowly reaching, peak level in his career. Perhaps probably 1 or 2 years later than he'd have liked. But the change in diet probably allows him another 2 or 3 years at the very top. And yeah, if we can bring in, I really think a player like Broja at Chelsea would really complement him really nicely. They could play together, or they could rotate quite nicely. And although he's not so much a similar player, he has very similar traits. He's got the speed, he's got the strength, so they can complement each other quite nicely. So if he can just get some help, he's just crying out for it. I think he even said it in an interview. He said, "I just need help." Then I see him hitting double figures again, even if he's not playing 47 games like he did last year.
Can Bowen keep it up? Because he was phenomenal last season. And he's another one, he's a bit younger. He's not had the injury problems, but there is a lot of reliance upon him. When Antonio, first half of the season, they were both absolutely fantastic. But then a lot of the kind of brilliance was left to Bowen in the second half of the season.
I think he can keep it up. I think this is a player that wants to go to the World Cup. He's had a taste of international football this summer. He's going to want to go to the World Cup, and if he scores 18 goals again in all competitions, then he'll be on the plane. He's reached first of all, he's found a club and a system that really suits him. As we said before, we rely on pacing on the counter attack. We rely on service into the box. And that's what he offers us. He offers us the pace going forward. He offers us space in wide areas. His movement is second to none. He can pull defenders around all over the place, which allows other players to come in. And he's almost unpredictable in a number of different ways, and he's improving his right foot as well. Obviously, he's predominantly left-footed. He likes cutting in from the right onto his left, but he's improving. I think he scored a handful of goals with his right foot last season, which was, a big improvement. I think he even admitted it publicly as well. So he's improving his game. The fact he got his England call up was richly deserved, and I didn't think he did badly as well for England. Showed he can do it on the international stage in patches. So I'm in no doubt that he's going to be there or thereabouts in terms of goal involvements next season in the Premier League. The only problem is, can we keep him beyond January if he does that?
Well, I think as well, does the World Cup, if he does go, worry you a little bit? Because the fact of the matter is the kind of ridiculousness of this World Cup is a whole season and a World Cup fit into the space of one season. The players are all going to be fatigued, really overworked. Does that give you a bit of worry, especially with the fact that it will disrupt your season, not all the way midway through, but basically midway through?
It is a slight concern. I mean, last year we played, I think it was 58 games in all competitions, sort of around the 56, 58 mark. And, there's potential that we might have that again. But then if we've got 8 or 9 international footballers at the club who then could be playing at least an additional 3. I don't know if there's any warm-ups. There probably isn't a couple of warm-ups, so maybe even an additional 5 games in the middle of the season out of the club's control. Then, yeah, it is a worry. It is a concern, particularly when you consider our squad's still so thin. We haven't invested half as much as we'd like to at this point, 3 weeks before the season starts. So it is a concern. And Bowen goes to the World Cup, having scored 10 goals in the Premier League beforehand, goes to the World Cup and then potentially gets injured because of fatigue or, there's so many different, but that's the risk for every player going, isn't it? So the hope is that we have enough depth to be able to counter it if it does happen. But he's going to be on fire like he was last year.
And do you think as well the kind of run of fixtures at the start of the season benefit you as well? You've got the difficult one of Man City, but that's at home. And then you've got a few of the newly promoted teams in the first few games. You've got Nottingham Forest. Brighton is a fairly difficult one, but then you've got Villa, Tottenham. It's kind of a mix in there. Could that benefit you, or is that going to be a difficult start of the season?
I don't think it really matters, if I'm honest. We're so used to playing top six clubs on the opening weekend of the season. I think last year when we played Newcastle was the first year in 7 years that we hadn't played a top six club on the opening weekend. So we're used to having sort of slightly difficult starts. The year that we finished sixth 2 years ago, we lost the first 4 or 5 games of the season. And then went and finished sixth. So I don't think it matters too much. Obviously, you want to start with a win. We did that last year. It's going to be difficult this time around. But, Forest, you don't really know what you're going to expect from them. Brighton, we've never beaten Brighton since they were promoted to the Premier League. They're our bogey team, not expecting anything with that. But then you fancy Villa, and I always fancy it against Spurs because, anything can happen in the London derby. So it could go either way, really, for West Ham in terms of the start. But I don't think it really matters because, as the old saying goes, you've got to play everyone twice. It doesn't really matter.
Right, let's move it on to the set pieces then. I feel like you've been itching to talk about them because they are so good. You're one of the best teams in the league at it. You're joint fifth from goals scored for them last season, and you had a fairly high XG from them as well. I mean, first and foremost, let's talk about why you're so good at scoring from these.
Well, I mean, one of the first things Moyes did when he returned to the club, he brought Thomas Suchek in. She straight away knew his aerial ability. He's then brought Zuma in, who's always been good in the air. And he knew that he already had the likes of Aaron Cresswell and Manuel Lanzini and those players that can put balls into the box consistently with accuracy. So it was almost a no-brainer. Okay, well, I need to go in the market in January and bring in players that are good in the air. And that's what he's done. Thomas Suchek, revelation in that first full season. Was that 9 goals, I think, or 10 goals from midfield, and I think 8 of those were headers. So yeah, that's what he aims for. That's what he aims for. Counter attack. If you're not going to score, you get the set piece, and he's built a squad of very, very big and tall players that statistically are very good in the air. So he knows that there's going to be someone on the end of it. And
do you think that this is something that who play Fantasy Premier League or whatever they do, or if they bet on these games, that this is something that they should target? They should target maybe the people that you don't expect to score, like you said, the Zumas, the Sucheks, back them with the potential of clean sheet points as well, to kind of maybe get you a bit of a differential kind of involvement.
I think so. I think Suchek's an interesting one because it's whether he is going to get as regular game time as he has done over the last 2 years with Flynn Downs coming in and potentially one other. He might not be playing it as regularly. But if he's playing regularly, then he's certainly one to be looking at, depending on the role that he plays in that midfield. But any of West Ham centre-backs that are playing, you should be looking at those going, well, if West Ham are going to be winning corners, then the likes of Zuma, Ogbono's notorious for getting himself on the end of at least 4 or 5 corners a season. You should be looking at any of West Ham centre-backs or Suchek as options.
And Cresswell, who's going to be delivering a lot of them as well.
Yeah, we are in the market for a left-back. So it's whether Cresswell again gets a full season. He'd probably be, if we do get left back in, he might be rotated. I mean, Cresswell's now 32. 33, and I think ideally Moyes was looking at replacing or at least bringing someone in last year. Couldn't get the right guy, but there's offers in for at least 2 or 3 at the moment as we speak. So the likelihood is that someone comes in to at least be his understudy for the season, and it would be rotated a little bit. But if Cresswell's playing, then you know what you're going to get out of Cresswell. 9 out of 10 hits the target.
He's a solid player, and I think he was a bit of an FPL darling a season or 2 ago because he was just racking up the points in terms of
just a solid option,
with clean sheets as well, and hopefully he kind of regains that form. I guess the final point, and I think this will interest you from your perspective as a fan. Now, we kind of open up the show with a discussion about how maybe injuries or lack of squad depth affected the squad. But I don't know if you knew how good your injury record actually was last season. The team was actually second for time loss incidents. So you had the second fewest non-contact injuries in terms of in the Premier League. City were the best at that, but you were just behind with 1.9 per 1K minutes played. I mean, that's pretty sensational stuff. And then in terms of it, you had 5.7 injuries per 1K minutes played. I mean, do you think that is testament to the brilliance of your backroom staff and mainly Moyes as well, kind of knowing how good you were? Because I think at one point, maybe the Chelsea game last season, a lot of people questioned the rotation that Moyes did around that match, but it paid off. And you got to the semi-final. Obviously he didn't go all the way, but he did the right things to potentially bring you success.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think a lot of that is overlooked by the fan base. The fan base automatically go, well, if you'd have invested more, then you wouldn't be having these issues, Dave. But at the same time, he chose not to invest for whatever reason, but then he did manage the squad incredibly well. When you've only got options of Masuaku and Yarmolenko on the bench, it's very difficult to really know how to approach games like the Chelsea game that you just mentioned. How do I approach it? And he did manage it really well. I mean, and then you factor in Antonio changing his diet, which saved us about 3 injuries last season alone. And you can't really account for Ogbonna doing his ACL in October. So yeah, now you've said it. Actually, he did manage the squad really well, and I think that's again, West Ham aren't used to having that. We're used to having a long injury list and going, but luckily we've got the squad to back it up. But this time it was the complete opposite. We didn't have the squad to back it up, but luckily we didn't have the injuries to hurt us. But towards the end of the season, it was fatigue that cost us.
So I think in many aspects, because a lot of people are looking at the likes of maybe Newcastle, Leicester, and some of those other teams sniffing near around the Europa League places. But do you think that maybe in terms of, again, betting, Fantasy Premier League, the West Ham might be overlooked? You've got the kind of historical brilliance. People will say, oh, your squad might be stretched because of Europe again, but you handled it last year. You did really well. And if people are worried about the kind of stretches, maybe target the first part of the season. But you guys have proven 2 seasons in a row now that you're not to be overlooked. You're not to be underappreciated.
Yeah, that's the first time I think in Premier League history that we've had 2 consistent seasons back to back. Normally we would finish well, we'd have a good season, and then we'd finish up by dropping 10 places in the league or being relegated the following year. So finishing 6th and 7th, qualified for Europe both times, the first time we've really done that as a football club. The concern, as we've already discussed, is, we might start well, but then you've got a World Cup in the middle of the season. If we've still got a thin squad, how do we cope with it? Is it going to be the same story? Personally, I think that, if we don't invest well enough between now and the end of the window, don't pad the squad out, then it won't go as well as last season did. I don't think the squad will be able to cope with two 50 game seasons plus a World Cup in the middle of one. I don't think the majority of the squad will be able to handle it as well as they did last year. I think it might be a little bit too much. But that's down to Moyes and the recruitment team to make sure that those players aren't put in that position. But yeah, I think that there's an element of confidence that we can have another run in Europe and have another another stab at, at least top 8. I think West Ham fans would be happy with the top 8 finish.
So what's your prediction then for the season? Where are you going to come? Is it going to be another European semi-final or even better this time?
I really don't know what to expect of the Conference League. I mean, I don't like how some fans kind of turn their noses up at it a little bit. West Ham, we haven't got the right to turn our nose up at the Conference League, not just yet. We should embrace it. We've got, given that we're a Premier League club and the finances that we've got at our disposal, the size of the club, we should be going quite deep in that competition. And there's no disrespect to anyone else playing in it, but if you look at, it's a Roma, Leicester fan, or they did really well in it last year because they took it seriously. So we should do the same. They're proof that if you take this competition seriously, you can potentially go all the way. So I'd like to see us go for it again. I think Moyes will probably choose to do that as well. But I think we've now reached a stage in our, particularly under Moyes, but in our recent history, that we should be trying to win silverware. One way, whatever silverware it is. I'd like us to go again for a domestic trophy. I think we're now at a stage where we need to start picking up some silverware. If it's Europe, happy days. But I think we've got a better chance domestically. League Cup probably. But in terms of Premier League, as I said, top 8. I think we're good enough to finish top 8 if the recruitment's right. But it's just weird me talking about this for third year running. Not used to this. Normally I'm going, if we finish 15th, I'll be happy. And now I'm like, let's try and get to a European final and finish in the top 8 of the Premier League. It's all very surreal, to be honest, but enjoying every minute. And David Moyes is an absolute hero in East London at the moment, what he's done at this football club, because we didn't see this coming when COVID hit. We were struggling in the relegation zone, and 2-3 years later, here we are. So, exciting.
I mean, legitimately, you're one of the big boys now in the Premier League, and I think people do fear you. But James, that is the end of our extended analysis. We will be doing for people a short, tiny little top 4 fantasy asset, so people do tune in for that one. But I just can't thank you enough for your time today. As always, it's such a pleasure to chat to you, and just remind people once again where to check out the great work that you do.
It's been a pleasure. So you can catch us on the We Are West Ham podcast, available on all your favourite podcast platforms, also on YouTube. And we're on Twitter at @WeAre_West Ham. If you do decide to tune in, the first 20 minutes of every podcast is usually me and my co-host Will chatting about everything but football. So just be prepared that for mundane chat, as we call it, building sheds and email etiquette and the like. But it's good fun, and it's well worth tuning in if you're that way inclined.
There you go, people. Check that out, and check out the second video as well, which will be out soon.